The shed door splintered under the force of the axe, wood fragments scattering across the frozen ground as the tall figure in the doorway stepped through the wreckage. Snow swirled behind him, caught in the amber glow of his lantern as his eyes found the huddled form in the corner. The pregnant woman pressed herself against the rough wooden wall, her breath visible in small puffs of vapor, her dark hair matted with sweat despite the bitter cold. "Please," Helen Williams whispered, her voice barely audible above the howling wind. Her hands instinctively moved to protect the swell of her belly, now 7 months along, as she tried to make sense of the imposing silhouette before her. The man stood well over 6 feet tall, his broad shoulders filling the doorframe, a thick beard covering the lower half of his weathered face. "You're sleeping inside tonight," Henry Wilson said, his voice a low rumble that carried authority. He set the lantern down and extended his hand toward her, but Helen recoiled, pressing herself harder against the wall. The mountain man studied her for a long moment, taking in her torn clothing, the purple bruise across her left cheek, and the way she trembled from both cold and fear. His jaw tightened as he noticed the rope burns around her wrists. "I won't hurt you," Henry said, lowering his hand, "but you'll freeze to death if you stay out here another night." Helen's mind raced as she tried to process what was happening. Just hours ago, she had been convinced she would die alone in the bitter mountain cold. Her husband, Eric Young, had left her here 3 days prior, his parting words still echoing in her ears like a curse. He had discovered her condition and flew into a rage, accusing her of bringing shame upon their family name. Before we see how this ends, tell us where you're watching from and hype this video in the comments. The memory of how she had arrived in this desolate place came flooding back. It had begun 6 weeks earlier, when she first suspected she was carrying a child. Eric Young had been her secret lover for nearly a year, a married man prominent in their community. When Helen finally told him about her condition, she had hoped he might find a way to help her. Instead, Eric's face had twisted with rage. "You little fool," he had hissed. "Do you have any idea what you've done? What this will cost me?" When Helen had refused to promise her silence about the father's identity, Eric's desperation had turned to violence. The next morning, 3 of his hired men had arrived at her cabin before dawn, bound her hands and loaded her into a wagon, driving her deep into the mountains to this abandoned shed. For 3 days, she had survived on melted snow and scraps of dried meat found scattered on the floor. The nights had been the worst, when the temperature plummeted and she had talked to her unborn child during those long, dark hours, promising that somehow she would find a way to give it a better life. By the third night, hypothermia had begun to set in. Then the axe had crashed through the door, and Henry Wilson had stepped into her world like some primitive savior. "Who are you?" Helen finally managed to ask. "Name's Henry Wilson," the mountain man replied, crouching down closer to her eye level. "I've got a cabin about 2 miles up the ridge, warm fire, hot food, and a bed where you can rest properly." Helen studied his face in the lamplight, searching for any sign of predatory intent. Instead, she found genuine concern, mixed with a weary sadness that spoke of his own experiences with hardship. "Why should I trust you?" she asked. Henry considered her question seriously. "Because I've been watching this place for 2 days, waiting to see if whoever left you here was coming back. When I realized they weren't, I decided to act." "You've been watching me?" "The shed. I make regular patrols through this area, checking for signs of trouble. 3 days ago, I saw wagon tracks and smoke. Yesterday, the smoke stopped, but I could still hear movement. Today, nothing. I figured whoever was in here was either dead or close to it," Henry continued. "Couldn't live with myself if I walked away without checking." The simple humanity of his statement brought tears to Helen's eyes. After 3 days of feeling abandoned, the idea that someone had been concerned enough to investigate filled her with unexpected hope. "I don't even know if I can walk," she admitted. "Then I'll carry you," Henry said without hesitation. He shrugged off his heavy coat, a garment sewn from multiple animal pelts. "Put this on first." Helen hesitated, then reached out to accept the coat. It was still warm from his body heat and smelled of wood smoke and pine needles. As she pulled it around her shoulders, she felt the first real warmth she had experienced in days. Henry held out his hand again. This time, Helen took it, allowing him to help her struggle to her feet. Her legs buckled immediately, and she would have fallen if not for his quick reflexes. Easy, he murmured. Take your time. Your body's been through hell. Why are you helping me? She asked as he guided her toward the broken doorway. Henry was quiet for so long that Helen wondered if he had heard her. Finally, as they stepped out into the swirling snow, he spoke. Because everyone deserves a chance to survive, and because I know what it's like to be left for dead. The journey to Henry's cabin took nearly an hour, with frequent stops to allow Helen to rest. The mountain man never showed impatience, instead using the breaks to point out landmarks and tell her about the wildlife that inhabited these remote peaks. The cabin, when it finally came into view, was larger than Helen had expected. Built from massive logs and chinked with mud and moss, it sat in a small clearing surrounded by towering pines. Smoke rose from a stone chimney, and warm light glowed from windows covered with scraped animal hide. Inside the cabin was a revelation. The main room was spacious and well organized, with a large stone fireplace dominating one wall. Hand-hewn furniture filled the space, and the walls were lined with books and supplies. Sit by the fire, Henry instructed, guiding Helen to a chair near the hearth. I'll get some food started. As Henry moved around the cabin preparing what appeared to be a hearty stew, Helen had her first real opportunity to study her rescuer. Despite his imposing size and rugged appearance, there was something gentle about the way he went about his tasks. How long have you lived here? Helen asked. Going on 8 years now, Henry replied. Came up here after the war ended, looking for some place quiet where a man could think. Helen found herself studying the books on his shelves, surprised by the variety of titles. There were practical volumes on survival, but also works of literature, philosophy, and poetry. You're not what I expected, Helen said softly. Most stories about mountain men are nonsense, Henry said with amusement. Keeps unwanted visitors away. The stew, when Henry finally served it, was the most delicious thing Helen had ever tasted. Rich broth thick with vegetables and venison, seasoned with wild herbs. How far along are you? Henry asked quietly as they ate. 7 months, Helen replied, placing her hands on her belly. That means you'll need proper care soon. Birthing a child isn't something to take lightly, especially up here. Helen felt tears prick at her eyes as the full weight of her situation returned. The father is the one who had me locked in that shed. Henry's expression hardened. Tell me what happened. Helen began to tell her story, speaking haltingly at first about her relationship with Eric Young and the events that had led to her imprisonment. Henry listened without judgment, his expression remaining neutral. So he's trying to cover up his involvement, Henry said when she finished. Make you disappear so his reputation stays intact. He said there were ways to make problems like me vanish, Helen confirmed, shivering. Men like that think they can use people and throw them away when it becomes inconvenient. They count on their victims being too scared to fight back. What choice do I have? Helen asked desperately. I'm unmarried, pregnant, and alone. You're not a problem, Henry said firmly. You're a woman who made some choices that didn't work out. That doesn't make you disposable. Over the following days, Helen began to recover her strength. Henry proved to be a surprisingly capable caregiver, helping her through the worst of her physical recovery while maintaining a respectful distance. She found herself drawn to this enigmatic man who had saved her life, intrigued by the combination of strength and gentleness he displayed. What happened to you during the war? She asked one evening as they sat by the fire. Henry was quiet for a long moment. I came back different than when I left. People looked at me like I was something dangerous. Maybe they were right. Is that why you live alone up here? Partly. Also because I got tired of pretending to be someone I wasn't. Henry stood and moved to tend the fire. I know what it's like to be judged for things you can't change. What will you do when Eric realizes I'm not dead? Helen asked. Let him come, Henry said grimly. This is my territory. If he wants to find you, he'll have to go through me first. I can't ask you to put yourself at risk for me. You're not asking, I'm offering. Helen felt tears streaming down her cheeks, overwhelmed by this unexpected kindness. Why would you do this for someone you don't even know? Henry considered her question. Maybe because I wish someone had done it for me when I needed it most. Or maybe because it's the right thing to do. As the weeks passed, Helen settled into the rhythm of life in the mountain cabin. She helped Henry with household tasks and tended to the animals, grateful to have something useful to do. The physical activity felt good after days of forced inactivity. "Tell me about your family," she said one evening. Henry's expression softened. "I have a sister, Ruth. She's married to a shopkeeper in Denver. Good man, treats her well. They've got 3 children now. Don't you miss having family around?" "Sometimes, but Ruth has her own life now." "What about you? Any family who'll be worried about your disappearance?" Henry asked. "My parents died in a cholera outbreak 3 years ago. I have an aunt in San Francisco, but we haven't spoken since the funeral." As her pregnancy progressed, Helen found herself thinking more about the practical realities of giving birth in this remote location. "What's going to happen when the baby comes?" she asked one evening. Henry looked at her seriously. "I've helped birth foals and calves, and I was there when my sister had her first child. It's not the same as having a proper doctor, but it's something." "Are you scared?" Henry asked. "Terrified," Helen admitted. "Then we'll figure it out together. Women have been having babies for thousands of years. Your body knows what to do." The first sign of trouble came on a crisp morning in late November when Henry returned from his daily patrol with a grim expression. "We've got visitors coming," he announced, his rifle held ready. 3 men on horseback, about 2 miles down the main trail. Helen felt her heart skip a beat. "Eric? Could be hunters, but hunters don't usually travel in groups of 3 this late in the season." Henry moved with practiced efficiency, checking his weapons and securing the cabin's defenses. Heavy wooden shutters could be lowered over the windows, and there were rifle slots cut into the walls at strategic points. "If things go badly, you get to the root cellar and stay hidden," Henry instructed. "I'm not leaving you to face them alone," Helen protested. "You're 7 months pregnant. Your job is to keep that baby safe." They waited in tense silence as the minutes crawled by. Finally, 3 riders emerged into view, and Helen's heart sank as she recognized Eric Young's arrogant posture. "Hello, the cabin," Eric called out. "We're looking for someone, and we think she might be here." Henry didn't respond immediately, taking his time to assess the situation. "We know you're in there," Eric shouted. "We just want to talk to the woman." "State your business and move on," Henry called back. "This is private property." "Our business is with Helen Williams. She's a runaway, and her family's worried sick." "Don't know anyone by that name," Henry replied. Eric's face darkened. "Listen, Mountain Man, we know she's in there. You can hand her over peacefully, or we can come in and get her." "Here's my choice," Henry replied, and Helen heard his rifle being cocked. "You've got 10 seconds to turn around before I start shooting." Eric held up a hand to stop his men from drawing their weapons. "There are 3 of us and only 1 of you." "They're good enough odds for me," Henry said grimly. "All right, we'll go." But this isn't over. The 3 men turned their horses and rode toward the tree line, but Helen noticed they didn't go far. They stopped just inside the forest, clearly intending to wait for darkness. "They're not leaving," Helen observed. "Didn't expect them to. Eric Young didn't ride all the way up here just to turn around. He'll wait for dark and try to sneak up on us." Henry spent the rest of the day preparing for a siege, moving supplies and checking weapons. As the evening approached, he lit only a small fire for minimal light. As darkness fell, Helen found herself straining to hear any sound that might indicate approaching attackers. The wind had died down, leaving an eerie stillness. "There," Henry whispered suddenly, pointing toward the back of the cabin where a shadow moved stealthily toward the building. Henry slipped away from the front window and positioned himself at a rifle port covering the rear. The night exploded with the crack of his rifle, followed by a scream of pain from behind the cabin. "One down," he muttered, moving back toward the front. The remaining 2 men rushed the cabin from different directions. The front door shuddered under Eric's assault, while the side window exploded inward as the second attacker smashed through. Henry spun toward the window, his rifle coming up as the intruder tried to climb through. The shot was so close Helen felt the muzzle flash, and the attacker pitched backward with a cry. But the distraction had given Eric his chance. The front door burst open, and Eric stepped inside with his pistol drawn. "Drop the rifle," Eric commanded, his weapon trained on Henry's chest. Henry hesitated, then carefully lowered his rifle and kicked it away. Hello, Helen, Eric said conversationally. You've led us quite a chase. I hope you've enjoyed your vacation, because it's over now. You don't have to do this, Eric, Helen said, trying to keep her voice steady. I know you wouldn't have told anyone, Eric replied, his tone almost gentle, because you're not going to have the chance. Henry tensed, preparing to make a move despite the gun pointed at him. You got what you came for. Let me walk away. Eric laughed coldly. I don't think so. You've seen too much. Besides, I can't have witnesses to what happens next. What happens next? Helen asked, dreading the answer. What should have happened weeks ago? You're going to have a tragic accident. These mountains are dangerous places for pregnant women. Helen felt her baby move restlessly within her, and rage filled her at Eric's casual dismissal of their child's life. You're a coward, she said, her voice growing stronger. Eric's face darkened. Our child? That bastard you're carrying is no child of mine. It's a mistake that should have been dealt with months ago. The casual cruelty of his words had hit Helen like a physical blow, but also strengthened her resolve. Henry had been listening with growing fury, and Helen could see him preparing to act. You're right about one thing, and Henry said suddenly. These mountains are dangerous places, especially for city folk who don't know what they're dealing with. The attack came so swiftly Helen barely saw it. Henry dove left, rolling behind the table as Eric's pistol roared. The bullet splintered the wall, but Henry was already moving, coming up with a knife that seemed to appear from nowhere. Eric tried to track him, but Henry was too close and fast. The knife flashed, and Eric screamed as the blade opened a gash across his gun arm. His pistol clattered to the floor. The two men crashed together, rolling across the floor as they fought. Eric was younger, but Henry had experience in desperation. He knew that losing meant death for Helen and her child. Eric managed to get on top, his hands closing around Henry's throat. Henry's face began to turn purple as Eric's grip tightened. Helen realized Henry was losing the fight. Without conscious thought, Helen found herself moving toward Eric's fallen pistol. Her pregnancy made her clumsy, but desperation gave her speed. Her fingers closed around the weapon just as Eric noticed her movement. Stay back, Eric snarled, but he didn't release his hold on Henry. I'll kill him right now. Helen raised the pistol with both hands, surprised by its weight. She had never fired a gun, but she had watched Eric clean this weapon many times. Let him go, Eric, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. Eric's eyes flicked between Helen and the gun, trying to decide if she had the courage to use it. You won't shoot me, you don't have it in you. Try me, Helen replied, and something in her voice convinced him. Eric released Henry and slowly raised his hands. Henry rolled away, gasping and clutching his bruised throat. This is how it's going to work, Helen said, keeping the gun trained on Eric. You're going to walk out of here and never come back. You're going to forget you ever knew me. Eric laughed bitterly. You think you can hide up here forever? What about when that baby comes? You can't stay hidden forever. Henry struggled to his feet, his voice hoarse. She won't be alone, and next time you come after her, I'll be ready. Eric's eyes narrowed. You think you can protect her? One man against all my resources? I think you're a coward who preys on women and children. And when word gets out about what you've done, your precious reputation won't be worth anything. Fear flickered in Eric's eyes. His position in society depended on maintaining his respectable image. No one will believe her word against mine, Eric said uncertainly. Maybe not, but they'll believe mine. And I've got friends who would be very interested in hearing about a rich man who abandons pregnant women to die. Eric's face went pale as he realized Henry's threat. The mountain man might be a hermit, but he clearly had contacts that Eric's respectable friends would never associate with. What do you want? Eric asked. I want you to disappear. Go back to your wife and comfortable life. Pretend Helen Williams never existed. Because if I ever see you again, your money won't save you. Eric stared at Henry, clearly weighing his options. Finally, he nodded. Fine, but this isn't over. It already has ended, Helen replied. You just don't know it yet. Eric moved slowly toward the door, hands raised, eyes never leaving the gun. When he reached the threshold, he looked back one last time. You're making a mistake. This won't end well. It already has ended, Helen repeated. Eric stepped into the night, and soon they heard horses' hooves as he and his surviving companion rode away. Helen lowered the gun with shaking hands, suddenly aware of how close they had come to disaster. Is it over? She asked. For now, Henry replied, moving to secure the damaged door. But he'll be back eventually. What do we do now? Now we prepare for winter, and we get ready for that baby to come. The weeks following Eric's visit passed in quiet preparation. The confrontation had changed something between Helen and Henry, creating a bond forged in shared danger. Helen found herself studying Henry with new eyes, seeing him not just as her rescuer, but as a potential partner. You're staring at me again, Henry observed one evening. I'm thinking about how different things might have been if I had met you first. Henry's hand stilled on the bridle he was repairing. Don't go down that road, Helen. It doesn't lead anywhere good. Why not? Is it so impossible to imagine? You're a beautiful woman who deserves more than life with a broken-down hermit. Don't let gratitude make you think otherwise. Don't you think that's my decision to make? While you're carrying another man's child and running for your life, your judgment is compromised. Helen wanted to argue, but she could see Henry had made up his mind. He was protecting himself, afraid to hope for something that might not last. As December deepened and the snows grew heavier, Helen found herself increasingly confined to the cabin. Henry seemed to grow more protective each day, rarely leaving her alone and sleeping with the rifle within reach. You're wearing yourself out, Helen told him as he checked the cabin's defenses. Again, better safe than sorry. Eric isn't coming back, at least not until spring. You really believe that? Helen considered carefully. I think Eric is a coward. He'll look for easier ways to solve his problem before risking another confrontation. What kind of easier ways? Legal ones. He has connections. He might try to have you arrested or claim you kidnapped me. Henry nodded grimly. I've thought of that too. Christmas came with little fanfare, marked only by a special dinner. Helen had knitted Henry a scarf while he surprised her with a beautifully carved wooden cradle. It's perfect, Helen said, admiring the intricate designs. The baby will love it. Every child deserves a proper place to sleep. As January arrived with brutal snowstorms, Helen began to feel the first stirrings of labor pains. They were mild at first, but as days passed, they grew stronger. I think it's starting, she told Henry one morning, as a contraction doubled her over. Henry dropped his firewood and moved quickly to her side. How long have you been having pains? A few days, but they're getting worse. Henry helped her to the bed. This is it then. Are you ready? I don't think anyone's ever really ready. You'll do fine. You're the strongest woman I've ever known. The labor progressed slowly over several hours, with Helen alternating between intense pain and relative comfort. Henry proved capable and reassuring, helping her through contractions and keeping her comfortable. I can see the head, Henry announced as the final stage began. Just a few more pushes. With a final tremendous effort, Helen felt her child slip free. The sudden absence of pressure was shocking, and for a moment she lay gasping. Then she heard it, a thin, angry wail that filled the cabin. It's a girl, Henry said, his voice thick with emotion as he cleaned the baby. A beautiful, healthy girl. Helen struggled to sit up as Henry wrapped the baby and placed her in Helen's arms. Helen felt her heart overflow with love so intense it took her breath away. The baby was tiny but perfect, with dark hair and bright eyes that seemed to take in everything. She stopped crying the moment Helen took her. Hello, little one, Helen whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks. I'm your mama. What will you name her? Henry asked softly. Helen had thought about names for months, but now only one seemed right. Sarah, she said, looking up at Henry. I'd like to call her Sarah. Henry's eyes widened with a surprise and an emotion. Helen was naming her daughter after his lost wife. Are you sure? He asked, voice barely a whisper. I'm sure. She saved both our lives, in a way. Henry nodded, unable to speak. When he found his voice again, it was husky with tears. Sarah Williams. It's a good name. As winter began to loosen its grip, Helen found herself thinking about the future. Sarah was healthy and growing, but their isolated existence couldn't continue indefinitely. We need to talk about what comes next, Helen said one evening. Henry looked up from his book, expression guarded. What do you mean? We can't stay here forever. Sarah needs more than we can give her here. She's got everything she needs right here. For now, but what about when she's older? Schooling, medical care, other children. Henry was quiet, staring into the flames. I've been thinking about that too. There might be a way. What kind of way? My sister Ruth lives in Denver. She's got 3 children, and her husband runs a successful business. They could take you in. Helen felt her heart sink. You mean you could take us there and come back here? Henry nodded, not meeting her eyes. It would be best for both of you. Is that what you want? Henry was quiet so long, Helen thought he wouldn't answer. What I want doesn't matter. It's what's best for you and Sarah. What if there was another option, like you coming with us? Starting over somewhere new, all 3 of us together. Henry shook his head. I can't do that. I don't belong in civilization anymore. How do you know if you don't try? Because I tried once before. After the war, I tried to go back to my old life. It didn't work then, and it won't work now. That was different. You were alone then, trying to rebuild something broken. This would be starting fresh. With another man's child? The question hung in the air, and Helen realized they had reached the heart of the matter. Henry was afraid he could never truly accept Sarah as his own. She's not Eric's child, Helen said firmly. Not in any way that matters. He rejected her before she was even born. You're the one who protected her, who helped bring her safely into the world. If anyone has a claim to being her father, it's you. Henry looked at the sleeping baby. It's not that simple. Why not? Because some preacher didn't say words over us? Those things don't make a family. Love makes a family. Being there for each other makes a family. Henry stood and moved to the window, staring at the peaks that had been his refuge. You don't know what you're asking. I'm asking you to take a chance on happiness. I'm asking you to stop punishing yourself and start building something good. And if it doesn't work, if I can't be the man you need, Helen moved to stand beside him. Then we'll figure it out together. That's what families do. Henry turned to look at her, and Helen saw longing in his eyes. He wanted what she was offering, but was afraid to reach for it. I love you, Henry, she said simply. Not because you saved my life, not because I'm grateful, but because of who you are. Because you're kind and strong and decent. Because you make me feel safe and valued. Henry's eyes widened. Helen, I know you loved your wife. I'm not trying to replace that. But she's gone and you're still here. You still have a life to live, and I want to live it with you. Henry reached out and touched her face gently. You deserve better than a broken-down mountain man. I deserve a man who loves me and my daughter, who will stand by us no matter what comes. Henry was quiet, his hand cupping her cheek as he searched her eyes. Finally he spoke. If we do this, there's no going back. Once we leave these mountains, we'll be committed to making it work. I know, that's what I want. What do you want? Henry looked at Sarah's cradle, then back at Helen. I want to be the man you think I am. I want to be worthy of the love you're offering. You already are, Helen whispered, rising to kiss him softly. The kiss was gentle and tentative at first, then deepened as Helen responded. When they broke apart, both were breathing hard, and Henry had tears in his eyes. I love you too, he said quietly. I think I have since the night I found you, but I was too scared to admit it. So you'll come with us? You'll give us a chance? Henry nodded slowly. I'll give us a chance. God help me, I'll try. They spent the evening making plans. Henry would write to Ruth explaining the situation and asking for help getting established in Denver. It would be risky, but it was worth taking for the chance at a real life together. What if Eric finds us? Helen asked. Then we'll deal with him. But I don't think he'll be a problem. He's had months to make his move and hasn't. I think he's decided to cut his losses. Helen hoped Henry was right, but she was tired of living in fear. It was time to take a chance on the future. Spring came early that year, with snows melting rapidly and the first green shoots appearing in the meadows. As trails became passable, Henry began preparations for their journey to Denver. We'll take the northern trail through the high passes, Henry explained. showing Helen his hand-drawn maps. It's longer, but keeps us away from main roads where we might be recognized. Helen studied the route, noting the numerous small towns they would pass through. After months of isolation, the prospect of seeing other people was both exciting and terrifying. How long will it take? 2 weeks. Maybe 3 if weather turns bad. We'll need to travel slow with the baby. Sarah was thriving at 3 months old, her dark hair thick and eyes taking on Helen's deep brown color. Henry had become completely devoted to her, often spending hours simply watching her sleep. She's going to miss this place, Helen observed as Henry packed supplies. Will you? Henry asked. Helen considered carefully. The cabin had been her sanctuary, the place where she had found safety and love. But it had also been a hiding place. I'll miss the peace, the simplicity, but I'm ready for whatever comes next. The night before departure, they sat by the fire one last time, Sarah sleeping in Helen's arms, while Henry made final adjustments to their plans. Are you having second thoughts? Helen asked, noting his tension. Every minute, but not about you and Sarah, about whether I can adapt to living around people again. You adapted to living with us. That's different. You two are family. Henry smiled, the expression transforming his weathered face. Yeah, family. They set out at dawn, Henry leading a pack horse while Helen rode beside him with Sarah secured in a specially designed carrier. The morning was crisp and clear, with promise of warmer weather in the valleys below. As they rode away, Helen looked back once at the cabin that had sheltered them. The building looked smaller from a distance, almost insignificant against the towering peaks, but she would never forget the sanctuary it had provided. The first days passed without incident. They kept to high trails Henry knew well, camping each night in sheltered spots. Sarah adapted better than expected, seeming to enjoy the constant motion and changing scenery. On their fourth day, they encountered their first travelers, a family of homesteaders heading west. Henry tensed, hand moving toward his rifle, but Helen placed a calming hand on his arm. Good morning, the wagon's driver called out. He was middle-aged with kind eyes, clearly no threat. Morning, Henry replied cautiously. Beautiful baby, the man's wife observed, smiling at Sarah, who peeked out with curious eyes. Thank you, Helen replied, returning the smile. After brief pleasantries about weather and trail conditions, the homesteaders continued on their way. That wasn't so bad, Helen said once they were gone. No, but it's going to get worse as we get closer to populated areas. He was right. As they descended and joined main trails toward Denver, they encountered more travelers. Most were friendly, but Helen could see Henry growing increasingly tense. You're going to have to get used to this, she told him one evening as they made camp. People are naturally curious. I know, it's just different. I'd forgotten how much people talk. Helen laughed softly. Wait until you meet your sister again. I bet she'll have plenty to say. Henry's expression grew thoughtful. I wonder if she'll even recognize me. I've changed a lot in 8 years. She's your sister. She'll know you. Helen hoped she was right. Henry's letter had been deliberately vague, mentioning only that he was bringing a friend and her child to Denver. What if she doesn't approve, Henry asked, of me showing up with an unmarried woman and her child? Helen felt irritation flash. Sarah isn't illegitimate. She has 2 parents who love her. The rest is just paperwork. Henry looked at her in surprise. Is that a proposal? Helen felt her cheeks burn. I didn't mean... Because if it is, Henry continued, eyes twinkling, I accept. Helen stared in shock. Are you serious? Dead serious. I love you and Sarah. I want us to be a real family. If that means getting married, that's what we'll do. Helen felt tears of joy. Yes, I'll marry you. Henry leaned over and kissed her gently. We'll find a preacher in Denver. Make it official before we do anything else. Your sister is going to think we're crazy getting married so quickly. My sister is going to be thrilled that I'm finally settling down. She's been after me to remarry for years. The rest of their journey passed in a haze of happiness. They were no longer just traveling companions, but a family heading toward a new life together. Denver was larger and more bustling than Helen had expected, grown rapidly from mining wealth and railroad expansion. Streets lined with substantial buildings housing banks, hotels, and businesses. It's certainly busy, Henry observed as they rode through the outskirts, dodging wagons and pedestrians. Are you sure about this? Helen asked, noting his discomfort. I'm sure about you. The rest we'll figure out. Ruth Wilson Sanders lived in a comfortable house on the better side of town, a two-story frame building with a neat garden and white picket fence. Henry paused at the gate, hand trembling as he reached for the latch. She's going to be so happy to see you, Helen said softly. The door opened before they could knock, and a woman who could only be Ruth stepped onto the porch. She was smaller than Henry but shared his dark hair and strong jaw, and her eyes widened with shock as she recognized her brother. Henry? She whispered, as if afraid he might disappear. Hello, Ruth, Henry said, voice rough with emotion. Ruth flew down the steps and threw herself into her brother's arms, tears streaming as she held him tight. I can't believe it's really you. I was so worried, so scared something had happened. Henry held his sister close, his own eyes wet. I'm sorry I stayed away so long. Ruth pulled back to look at his face, hands framing his cheeks. You look different. Older, but good. Healthy. Mountain air, Henry said with a slight smile. Ruth's attention turned to Helen and Sarah, expression curious but welcoming. And you must be Helen. Henry's letter didn't tell me nearly enough. There's a lot to explain, Helen said, returning Ruth's embrace. And this beautiful angel must be Sarah, Ruth continued, touching the baby's cheek gently. She's perfect. We think so, Henry said, and Helen heard the pride in his voice. Ruth looked between Henry and Helen, noting how they stood close together and the proprietary way Henry's hand rested on Helen's back. A slow smile spread across her face. Well, I think we have a lot to talk about. Come inside, both of you. You must be exhausted. As they followed Ruth into her comfortable home, Helen felt rightness settle over her. This was where they belonged, not hiding in the mountains, but living openly as a family among people who cared. The future was still uncertain, and there would be challenges ahead. But for the first time since leaving Millfield, Helen felt truly safe. She had Henry's love, a healthy daughter, and now family support. Whatever came next, they would face it together. Ruth's house was warm and welcoming, filled with comfortable clutter of a family with 3 young children. Helen found herself relaxing immediately, while Henry looked somewhat overwhelmed after years of mountain solitude. Over dinner, Helen and Henry carefully explained their situation, leaving out sordid details but making clear they had fled from a dangerous situation. Ruth listened with growing indignation. What kind of man leaves a pregnant woman to die in the wilderness? Ruth demanded, face flushed with anger. The kind who values reputation more than human life, Henry replied grimly. Well, Dion, he won't find you here, Kenneth said firmly. Denver's a big city, easy to disappear in, and we have friends who can help if this Eric fellow comes looking for trouble. There's something else, Henry said, glancing at Helen. Helen and I want to get married, as soon as possible. Ruth's face lit up with delight. Oh, Henry, that's wonderful. She jumped up to embrace them both, tears of joy streaming. Are you sure? Kenneth asked supportively. You've been through a bout of upheaval. Sometimes it's wise to let things settle. I've never been more sure of anything, Henry replied, arm tightening around Helen. We've been through hell together and come out stronger. I want Helen to be my wife, and I want to be a proper father to Sarah. Ruth wiped her eyes and beamed. When? As soon as we can arrange it, Helen said. We don't need anything fancy. I know just the minister, Ruth said excitedly. Pastor Williams at the Presbyterian Church. He's very understanding about unusual circumstances. The wedding was arranged for the following Saturday. Helen found herself swept up in Ruth's enthusiasm as they shopped for a simple but elegant dress and made arrangements. I can't believe Henry is finally getting married again, Ruth confided as they selected flowers. After Sarah died, I thought he'd never open his heart to anyone else. He told me about her, about losing her and the baby while he was at war. Ruth's eyes filled with tears. It nearly destroyed him. He blamed himself, even though there was nothing he could have done. When he came back and found her grave, I've never seen a man so broken. He's healing now, slowly, but he's healing. Because of you. You and little Sarah have given him something to live for again." The wedding day dawned clear and bright. Helen woke early, stomach fluttering with nervous excitement. Today she would become Mrs. Henry Wilson, officially joining her life to the man who had saved her in every way possible. The ceremony was small but perfect, held in Ruth's parlor with only immediate family and close friends. Pastor Williams proved exactly as Ruth described, kind and understanding, focusing on love and commitment rather than unconventional circumstances. "Do you, Henry Wilson, take Helen Williams to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, for better or worse, as long as you both shall live?" "I do," Henry said, voice strong and clear as he looked into Helen's eyes. "Do you, Helen Williams, take Henry Wilson to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, for better or worse, as long as you both shall live?" "I do," Helen replied, voice trembling with emotion. "By the power vested in me by the state of Colorado, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Henry, you may kiss your bride." Henry's kiss was gentle and reverent, a promise of all the love and devotion he had to offer. When they broke apart, Helen saw tears in his eyes that matched her own. "Mrs. Wilson," he said softly, testing how the name sounded. "I like the sound of that," Helen replied, standing on her toes to kiss him again. The reception was joyous but intimate, with Ruth having prepared an impressive feast. Helen found herself surrounded by warmth and acceptance, welcomed into the Sanders family as if she had always belonged. "So, what are your plans now?" Kenneth asked as the evening wound down. Henry and Helen exchanged glances. They had discussed this extensively during their journey. "We're thinking of opening a store," Henry said. "General goods serving the mining communities in the mountains. There's a real need for reliable suppliers who understand conditions up there." "That's a brilliant idea," Ruth said excitedly. "Henry knows those mountains better than anyone, and Helen has business sense." "It would mean traveling back and forth to the high country regularly," Helen added. But we could keep a home base here in Denver, give Sarah stability while still making use of Henry's knowledge." Kenneth nodded approvingly. "There's definitely money to be made in that trade. The miners are always in need of supplies, and most current suppliers don't really understand their needs." "We've already identified potential locations," Henry said. "There's a building on Market Street that would be perfect for a store and warehouse combination." As evening ended and they prepared to retire to the guest room Ruth had prepared, Helen reflected on how dramatically her life had changed. This morning she had been Helen Williams, unmarried mother and refugee. Tonight she was Helen Wilson, beloved wife and partner in a new business venture. "Any regrets?" Henry asked as they settled into bed together for the first time as husband and wife, Sarah sleeping peacefully nearby. "Only that we didn't meet sooner," Helen replied, curling into his embrace. "If we had met sooner, we might not have appreciated what we have now. Sometimes you have to go through darkness to really appreciate the light." Helen considered his words as she listened to his steady heartbeat. He was right. Their individual struggles had prepared them for this relationship, taught them to value love and commitment over superficial attractions. "I love you, Henry Wilson," she murmured against his chest. "I love you too, Helen Wilson, more than I ever thought possible." As Helen drifted off to sleep in her husband's arms, she felt deep peace and contentment. The future stretched ahead, full of possibilities. There would be challenges, but they would face them together as a family. The mountain man who had broken down her prison door had given her far more than rescue. He had given her love, partnership, and hope. In return, she had given him reason to rejoin the world and embrace life again. Together, they had created something beautiful from the ashes of their separate tragedies. And as first light crept through the windows of their new life, Helen knew the best was yet to come. 6 months later, Wilson General Goods was thriving, serving mining communities throughout the Colorado Rockies with supplies specifically chosen for mountain conditions. Henry's knowledge of terrain and miners' needs, combined with Helen's business acumen and natural charm with customers, had made them one of the most successful suppliers in the region. Sarah was growing into a happy, healthy toddler who charmed everyone she met. She had Henry's eyes now, though she retained Helen's dark hair, and clearly adored the man she called Papa, with perfect love. Eric Young had never appeared in Denver, and gradually Helen had stopped looking over her shoulder. Ruth's contacts had made discreet inquiries and learned that Eric's wife had finally given birth to a son, which seemed to have satisfied his need for an heir and reduced his interest in pursuing old vendettas. "Do you ever miss the mountains?" Helen asked Henry one evening as they reviewed their business ledgers in their comfortable home near Ruth's house. Henry looked up from the inventory sheets he was studying. Sometimes the quiet, the simplicity, but not the loneliness. He reached across the table to take her hand. "I have everything I need right here." Helen squeezed his fingers, marveling at how completely their lives had changed. The terrified woman who had huddled in that freezing shed seemed like someone from another lifetime. In her place was a confident businesswoman, beloved wife, and devoted mother. "What are you thinking about?" Henry asked, noting her distant expression. "Just remembering where we started. That night you broke down the shed door seems like a lifetime ago." "In many ways it was. We're completely different people now." Helen nodded, understanding what he meant. They had both been broken in different ways when they found each other. She by betrayal and abandonment, he by loss and guilt. Together they had healed each other and built something stronger than either could have achieved alone. Sarah toddled into the room, her small arms reaching up toward Henry with the absolute trust only a child could show. He scooped her up immediately, settling her on his lap as she babbled happily about her day. "Mama, Papa, look!" Sarah announced proudly, showing them a drawing she had made with Ruth's children that afternoon. "It's beautiful, sweetheart," Helen said, admiring the colorful scribbles that Sarah insisted represented their family. Henry studied the drawing with the same serious attention he gave to business contracts. "I can see all of us there," he said solemnly. "Very artistic." Sarah beamed at the praise, snuggling against Henry's chest with complete contentment. Helen watched them together, her heart full of gratitude for the unexpected family they had created. "I love you both," she said simply. "We love you too, Mama," Sarah said, reaching out to include Helen in their embrace. Henry's arms encircled both of them, and for a moment they sat in perfect harmony, three people who had found each other against all odds and built a life filled with love, purpose, and hope. Outside, Denver continued its bustling growth, full of ambition and possibility. But inside their warm home, surrounded by the people who mattered most, Helen Wilson knew she had already found everything she could ever want. The mountain man's rescue had given her far more than survival. It had given her a future worth living.